Planning territories. I could spend half a day talking about territories. We'll try and run through these just to give you a bit of a glimpse and see really what it comes down to. It's an opportunity, territories, to make huge differences to the amount of money you're going to recover from your business. Just imagine if you make small territories and it turns out they're actually too small to support a franchisee. You've got a really difficult problem on your hands. Let's imagine, on the other hand, you make them too large, and there was a water purifying business in Melbourne that set up in Perth with a franchise, gave them the whole Perth metro area, and after 2 years they were doing well, and the owner of the business, the franchisor, said, I want you to expand. And they said, no, we're quite happy. This is as big as we want to be. He didn't want to grow any larger. He had no way with his agreements to be able to change that situation. So what he ended up doing was paying a fortune to buy them out and set up 8 territories. Now that's something with foresight you can plan for, and if that happens, easy solutions to it. So you can see the difference from his point of view. He was able to increase his business volume by 5, 6, 7 times once he split those territories up. So it's important to understand. But if you make them too small, you end up with disputes, you end up with very little fee income, and you're going to be basically behind the 8 ball all the time. So it's important to understand that. When it comes down to territories, there's different ways of doing it. Do you need a territory which is like a brick wall, or does it need to be fairly loose and you just limit some elements? So there's what we call the preferred marketing area, or a PMA, where maybe there's an area where they only allowed to market, but they can actually have activity in further areas. Does that make sense? So they can go beyond that territory. So say you gave them the Gold Coast and said, this is your area, they could actually go up, maybe up into the mountains, up the coast, providing not treading on someone's toes, but they can't advertise there. And then, I suppose, when you look at it to begin with, you've got to start the business in an evolutionary sort of way. You're going to grow, you're going to add territories as you grow, and we'll cover some aspects of that, because there's strategic ways of doing that are much more effective and much simpler than taking a risk and opening territories here, there, and everywhere. So you've got to optimise that. You've got to keep your work down to a manageable level, than get caught flying backwards and forwards on an aeroplane or driving hundreds of kilometres, regularly to catch up with people. So the other thing is, some people, I must admit, we were guilty of this in the early days. We're starting off our window cleaning franchise. We got the maps of Australia, stuck them on the wall, and we had all these flags everywhere. We worked at every territory in the country. Well, after a while, we realised our territory size needed to be changed a little bit. But also, why do it? You're spending lots of wasted time where we could have been out there getting the business running. So do what you need to do, and then the rest of it will sort of evolve, and you'll probably have someone to do that for you later on. But obviously, you also want to keep your time and your investment minimised within reason when you're setting up. So when it comes to territories, it's up to you to really do that work, and there's going to be a cost either in your time or your staff's time or a consultant's time. So what you're expecting to present to a franchisee is, here's the territory which is specifically for you. Now, there's other bits and pieces to think about with territories, such as I mentioned, for example, splitting territories is an option that you have. So you can put that into your processes, and you've got to include that in your franchise agreement. Those are all sorts of things you need to address. And when another franchise comes along adjacent to an existing one, how do you handle that and the clients in that area? Very simple if you know how to do it. If not, you're into demarcation areas and disputes. It's a bit like being on the wharves. Suddenly, before you know it, you've got people, putting up red flags and so on. So you've got to avoid that. The person I work with and respect enormously is Peter Buckingham. He's someone that we're fortunate enough to be able to use his intellectual property. So some clients choose to work with him, but everyone gets access to him. So I've used some of his information here today, which I hope doesn't confuse you, but it's just showing you some of the material that they produce to show you how powerful territories are and different aspects. I'll just do a little case study. I always find this interesting, and it really is quite a useful example to show you. There was a fellow who was about 17 years old going through university. It's amazing how many franchises started off with university students. It's quite a number. And he wanted to open a sandwich shop, which he did. he didn't have a lot of money, but he was going to put $1,000 in. This was some years ago. He got a family friend who happened to be a lecturer at the college he was studying at, and they put in $500 each. After 12 months, they had $70 in the bank. And they said, what should we do? Should we close down? And as he says, you know, he was 17 years old, didn't know any better. So they opened another one. They opened a second store. And that went all right, but nothing outrageous. Then they opened a third store. And at that point, they changed the name from Pete's Sub to Subway. And what he did in that process was accidentally to create a model that is a very, very successful formula for growing a business or growing a franchise. I call it the Olympic rings principle. Because what is happening is that's his first store, that's his second one, that's his third one. And what happens when he opens his third one? People in there have already seen the brand, so there's already an awareness. And you built the business up large enough there that it's not going to be impacted in any significant way when this store opens. So they all build themselves. When I was in Bedshed, we didn't have designated territories, but it was understanding we had a local newspaper area that was 23,000 people. When the franchisor put one a few k's up the road from me, I was livid. I thought that was me, I'm done. And in fact, what happened, the other store opened in Melville, I was in Fremantle. My sales leveled off for a month, then they carried on growing. And eventually I bought Melville and the other one down the road. So they all add to your overall sort of branding value. So they've all got a component. Now, franchisees are terrified about competition. They all want to have everywhere to themselves. So part of the strategy when you're interviewing people is to sell them the benefits, which I won't go into now because that comes up later on. But you can see how that process for territories is a really successful formula. When the guys from Perth, from Beyond Rest, came over here for a weekend workshop, they said, we're seeing somebody on the Gold Coast because they're going to have a franchise from us. By the end of the weekend, they realised that that wasn't a sensible thing to do because they'd have spent their time on the red eye flying backwards and forwards, managing someone on this side of the country, and they're supposed to be running the business in Perth. So it's important to understand. As Peter refers to it, do you use the wet finger in the air technique when it comes to working out your franchises? Or do you use a targeted approach so you can look at the quality of the people or the types of businesses or the quantity, just the pure numbers? It's important to understand this. Or do you get in to look at really the statistics a little bit deeper, where you're looking at the true demographics of the sort of people that are there? So it's something to consider. Then there's different factors. Depending on your business and who your customer is, you're looking at different profiles of your ideal client, your ideal customer. So you can appreciate they're going to be different looking at your client, your customer, your current customer, to when you start looking for your franchisees who have got a different objective in life. So we're looking in sort of parallels to that. But some people rely on shopping centres. You know, Boost Juice grew because the shopping centres all said, we love this, and they just put it into every one. And that's the way that's why franchising grew so rapidly in Australia. We are the world's leaders in shopping centres. Whether that's good or bad, I'll leave to your own judgment. But the fact is, every few months there's a new shopping centre open. Hey, here's a new Donut King, here's a new this and that. So you've also got to look forwards. Up where I am at Hope Harbour, Hope Island up the road here, development ground to a halt when the GFC came, when there were vacant blocks, well, vacant areas of acres. And there's a McDonald's and a Subway there, and I think they've been bleeding for 5 years because the population didn't arrive. What's happened now in the last 12 months, suddenly everywhere's being built. The houses going up like it's going out of fashion. I think those guys are rubbing their hands and saying payback because they've got the site. But you've got to be conscious of that. So if you give somebody an outlying area and there's development planned, you can find out from the council, you want to make provision that in a few years' time that area can be subdivided because they're going to have, you know, more than they can handle. So then we come looking at the sorts of factors that will affect your business, your prospective customer, your client. So whether it's business to business or business to consumer, customer, what sort of people are there? And the term I like that I borrowed from Mal Emery is called your avatar. Who is your ideal customer? Once you know that profile, that's the person you're always looking for. That's who you're going to aim at in your advertising, with your packaging and everything else. And then the language that you use, because you've got to communicate in their language, not in yours necessarily. So that's important to understand. And your strategy is going to take all that into account. When we're looking at planning, you do need to be conscious of the long term. A lot of people have opened up here and failed. Starbucks, just been bought out here by the 7-Eleven owners because they just didn't succeed in Australia. They arrogantly thought they'd just come in and do it. It's not necessarily that easy. Clive Peters, electrical outlet that were bought by Harvey Norman. Krispy Kreme went broke twice. They took it for granted that everybody in Australia would lap their products up. They've persevered and put millions into it, and now it looks like they're on the right track. So you've got to plan for Australia-wide, but you don't need to go there and put the flags on all the territories, but just be conscious of where you're going. Make provision. And then you've got to look and say, the proactive versus reactive from the point of view of working out your territories. What is you really need from that point of view? Is it something you're going to lead? You're going to manage it? And what that refers to is, and Peter Buckingham used to work for Caltex. He did all their worldwide demographics for when they started opening, shops in their petrol outlets, and still does. He said that someone would come along and say, we want to open in Broome in WA. And the habit of the salespeople were, yeah, that's a sale, let's open in Broome. Well, Peter said, no, we need a progressive plan. We don't go there till we want to go there. If you want to move to Perth, you can open in Perth or in Albany or somewhere, but you'll have to wait for Broome. So don't be driven by demand necessarily. It doesn't say you ruled it out in total, but be careful. So make sure you know what your next step is. Pick the low-hanging fruit. It's as simple as that, isn't it? So we'll run through a little bit of information now. I'm going to compare some demographics. Basically, what you're looking to do, as I say, is equality. Now that means maybe different sorts of populations, different sizes, depending on the nature of the people in that area, for example. So to give you one example, Toorak, which you'll all be familiar with, I'll just look at a couple of numbers. We won't go into forensic detail, but the average income's around $2,000 a week. Mortgage repayments $2,700, rent $380. So what we'll do is we'll then move from there to Mosman Park in Perth, where you see a significant difference in the income and in the rental. So different, but similar, but not quite the same. So you've got to make some adjustments to your expectation of how many clients you get. Then you go south of Perth, down below Fremantle, which traditionally is fairly much a blue-collar area, and you're looking at a very different picture. You're less than $1,000 a month, so half the income. So their disposable income to purchase your product, if that's applicable, is going to be 50%. So you need to make account of that in your expectations. So that's just to give you a bit of an idea. And then when you look at home ownership, that's important in someone like Jim's case, where he's going to be generally probably refurbishing houses that are owner-occupiers as opposed to landlord-owned premises who are investors. So that's important to understand. So